The Estadio Nacional hosted many of Costa Rica's most historic moments: presidential inaugurations, visits by popes, rock stars, and the goal that sent Costa Rica to its first FIFA World Cup.
Well, that was rather silly. Oh, it's a goal! That's the goal! Joyous scenes in the National Stadium.
After 84 years, though, the stadium was falling apart, and President Oscar Arias needed money for a new one. He could raise taxes at home or take out a loan. But instead, Arias did something much, much easier. He flew to China and struck a deal.
4 years later, Costa Rica opened the gleaming 35,000-seat National Stadium. Chinese architects designed it. Chinese workers built it. And the best part? The Chinese government paid for it. China didn't just give Costa Rica a stadium. It also gave one to the Bahamas, Barbados, and El Salvador. In fact, China has helped build at least 149 stadiums in 70 countries. But while China paid for or loaned the money for all these stadiums, they weren't free. Why is China building stadiums for other countries? And what does it want in return?
China, and with the steady advance of the communist armies, their leader, Mao Zedong, took his place among Asia's men of destiny.
I'm always looking for stories that blend sports and geopolitics. That's the whole point of Search Party. And China's stadium building is a really interesting example of that. Its rise as a superpower is probably the most important story of the 21st century. And turns out building stadiums are one of the many tools it used to achieve that. It's a strategy China developed way back during the Cold War.
Shanghai falls within the shadow of the communist advance, and the world awaits the next move in the grim drama of China.
In 1949, Chinese communists pushed Chinese nationalists off the mainland and founded the People's Republic of China. Almost immediately, this new regime was pulled into the Cold War. It faced powerful enemies, led by the United States, but didn't have many friends it could trust. China was wary of the Soviet Union, who dominated most of Asia. China needed to build relationships with its neighbors, starting with the closest one. Mongolia was a poor country trying to modernize. It needed housing and factories, but China wanted to help it build something that would stand out. Mongolians loved sports, especially wrestling, but lacked a proper building to host matches or train athletes in. So in 1958, China gave Mongolia a 374 million won grant, plus thousands of construction workers, to help it build a stadium. 3 years later, they completed the National Olympic Stadium. A win-win for both countries. Mongolia got an impressive venue to host big events in, like the Naadam Festival. While China got a ton of goodwill, and something to remind Mongolians of its generosity for decades to come. In fact, Mongolia became one of the first countries to recognize China at the United Nations. By giving Mongolia a stadium, China made a friend. This strategy was soon known as stadium diplomacy. China deployed it on another neighbor, Nepal, and fellow communist country Vietnam. Then China helped build stadiums for important non-aligned countries, like Cambodia, Indonesia, and several in Africa. It was a good deal. Leaders received modern stadiums to host high-profile sports games and political events. In return, China gained a growing roster of partners willing to back it on the international stage. From the 1960s to 2000, China built almost one stadium a year. Then, it started building even more. China was increasingly setting its sights on Africa, where it needed friends and also something more. So I've got this really annoying problem when I write. Sometimes I spend all day on one scene or a couple sentences and I have to give up. But then right on my walk home, it comes to me.
exactly what I want to say and how I want to say it. So I used to use the phone memo app on my phone, but then I had to sift through this long audio file. So now I've started using my new Plod Note Pro. It's basically this AI note-taking assistant, basically the size of a credit card. It snaps magnetically on the back of my phone. So now when I get an idea, I just hit record and talk through the scene. Plod transcribes and organizes the whole thing, creates a summary, and makes it AI searchable, so I can go straight to the details I'm looking for. Same for my research calls and meetings. I can go to the summary and just look for what I need. It sounds like a small thing, but this Plod has really made those ideas I have on the go a lot more useful, because they're not just lost in some folder on my phone. So if you do a lot of writing, research, or meetings, check out the Plod Note Pro using the link in the description. Use my code for 10% off, and there's a 30-day free return policy. Thanks to Plod for supporting my work. Now I'll take you back to the story.
In the late 20th century, China lifted hundreds of millions of its people out of poverty. It built tens of millions of homes, factories, and roads, assembled the world's largest military, and devoured natural resources. Resources that increasingly came from Africa, like iron, copper, oil, and lots of others. China used stadiums to help access them. The oil-rich country Gabon is a great example. In the early 2000s, Gabon exported under $1 billion worth of oil to China. Then in 2008, Gabon signed a big trade deal with China that included an interest-free loan for a new stadium, the Sino-Gabonese Friendship Stadium. In 2012, Gabon used it to host the African Cup of Nations, the biggest soccer tournament on the continent. In 2015, the government flew in superstar Lionel Messi to break ground on another China-backed stadium. By then, Gabon was exporting billions of dollars worth of oil to China. These two stadiums didn't directly buy China access to Gabon's oil, but they did help cement a relationship that did. And everywhere else China built a stadium, it's the same story.
After building a stadium that was funded by Chinese, then miraculously, the Chinese are signing deals to mine all kinds of rubber, copper, iron, oil.
Itmar Dubinsky studies China's stadium diplomacy in Africa.
Indirectly, the Chinese are gaining from all kinds of contracts that are being signed to extract raw materials necessary for the Chinese economy.
As China built more stadiums in Africa, it did more trade with Africa, much of it in resources.
China was also filling a growing demand for stadium. In 1996, the AFCON tournament expanded from 20 matches to 32. More matches meant more stadiums. China would build half of the 42 stadiums used to host AFCON matches between 2002 and 2017.
In 2019, the tournament expanded to 52 matches, and China's filling the demand again.
It also helped that many African leaders were frustrated with Western governments, who often demanded they meet democratic and human rights standards in exchange for investment.
The Chinese are not doing that. African governments are attracted to those Chinese loans and grants to fund those stadiums because there aren't any strings attached.
And China's pretty good at building stadiums. In Kenya, Chinese architects designed a system to harvest rainwater and space for solar panels on this new stadium. And in Tanzania, where more than 10% of the population is disabled, they built a prominent ramp and extra handicap seating. Not every stadium China builds ends up being a wise investment. A decade after Messi visited, this one in Gabon is falling apart. But it doesn't matter to China.
The Chinese don't care if the stadium will serve a dictator for his personal ambitions for just one tournament. They do it for financial reasons and for a symbolic appearance. Hopefully that this gesture can serve bigger goals of the Chinese involvement in Africa.
Building stadiums in Africa helped China get resources. But then why did it build one in a country without many resources? Almost a century since the Civil War, China still claims Taiwan as its territory. Xi Jinping wants the Chinese military ready to invade by 2027. That's next year. 70 countries fully support China's claim and its efforts to take over Taiwan. Others endorse the wording of the claim. Most have a stadium financed and/or built by China, and it's not a coincidence. Supporting China's claim over Taiwan is the real price of a stadium. It's the diplomacy part of stadium diplomacy. But these countries have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. If China invades, they may support sanctioning it. So over the last couple decades, China's been persuading them to switch sides. Back in 2007, Costa Rica had diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Then China agreed to purchase $300 million in Costa Rican bonds, sign a free trade agreement, and pay for and construct a new national stadium. That same year, Costa Rica severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Again, one stadium didn't get Costa Rica to switch sides, but it was a key part of a deal that did. Just as it was in other countries. Like Dominica, who cut ties with Taiwan and got a new stadium in 2005. Grenada, who did the same in 2005. And El Salvador, who cut ties in 2018 as China pledged to build it a 50,000-seat stadium. China's using stadium diplomacy in the Pacific too. After the Solomon Islands and Nauru cut ties with Taiwan, China agreed to build them new stadiums. And when Kiribati followed, China invested $250,000 in its annual sports tournament, held in the Betio Sports Complex, built back in 2002 by China. China isn't just building stadiums, it's building support for taking over Taiwan. And by the looks of this map, it's working. But stadium diplomacy works the other way too. Tuvalu is one of the few countries that still has a diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, and its sports grounds were upgraded with funds from Taiwan. Taiwan also built gymnasiums and fields in the Marshall Islands, Palau, and even as far as Paraguay. Taiwan's taking a page out of China's playbook to keep its allies on its side. While these are no match for the glittering stadiums China builds, they still generate goodwill. Stadiums aren't just buildings for watching sports. They clearly represent much more. Just look at what we're willing to pay for them.
All right, thanks so much for watching this episode. If you haven't subscribed yet to Search Party, now's your chance. We cover sports and geopolitics. So head over to newpress.com. That's a new journalistic platform that we've launched with Johnny and Christoph and Max. And it's a perfect place for you to suggest ideas, ask questions, and I can get your help covering these stories. So head over to newpress.com, check it out, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.